Welcome to Literary Journeys with River. Today we bring you the summary of the tale of the body thief, the fourth book in Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles. Remember, this is just a summary, not the full book. If you'd like to see more content like this, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It helps YouTube recommend the channel to more readers. Let's get started. Prologue. Lestat, the immortal vampire, is ready to tell his story. But first, he must speak of the dreams that torment him. In them, he sees Claudia, the child vampire he created and lost more than a century ago, and David Talbot, his human friend. He also relives memories of his childhood in France, when he was still mortal, and of the transformation that granted him unimaginable power. Now, after centuries of existence, he suffers the weight of his immortality and the absence of his former companions. He possesses extraordinary abilities. He can move objects with his mind, create fire, and communicate with other vampires from a distance. However, he despises his own nature and the isolation it brings. In a disturbing dream, he sees David in danger, compelling him to seek him out. Lestat, the rebellious vampire, is ready to narrate his new adventure. A modern story filled with action and mystery. Chapter 1. Lestat arrives in Miami, a city he considers a paradise for vampires, where the hustle, diversity, and danger pulse through every street. He moves among mortals, enjoying his anonymity while selecting his next victim, a serial killer known as the Back Alley Strangler. Fascinated by the criminal's disturbed mind, he follows him into an alley, where, after a brutal confrontation, he drains him completely, absorbing his horrific memories. However, his hunt takes an unexpected turn when, on the beach, a stranger watches him intently. The man approaches, hands him an envelope, and flees in terror. Intrigued, Lestat opens the envelope and finds a Lovecraft story titled The Thing on the doorstep. The mysterious delivery and its strange connection to the messenger awaken in Lestat a sense of unease, just as he plans his next move. Chapter 2. Lestat travels to England in search of his friend David Talbot, leader of the Talamasca, a secret society dedicated to the study of the supernatural. After discovering that David has retired to his mansion in the Cotswolds, he finds him immersed in Faust and the Bible, contemplating the nature of the soul. Lestat, increasingly tormented by his immortal existence, confesses his desire to end his life by exposing himself to the sun in the desert. David, concerned, tries to dissuade him, appealing to their curiosity and friendship. He speaks of his past as a tiger hunter in India and the adventures he experienced before becoming a scholar. However, Lestat remains firm in his decision. After bidding farewell, he rises into the cold night, leaving behind his only human friend. In the air, he feels something pulling him back, but he continues, determined to face his fate. Chapter 3. Tormented by his immortality, Lestat decides to end his existence by facing the sun. In the Gobi Desert, naked and ready for his fate, he ascends to the edge of the atmosphere. The burning light consumes him. His skin boils, his flesh burns, but the pain does not destroy him. He screams as gravity pulls him back, crashing onto the sand. Amid hallucinations, he hears a child's voice, perhaps Claudia's. When he awakens, covered in sand, the sun threatens to burn him again. He endures until nightfall, buried alive by his own madness. With every movement, his charred skin tears, but he manages to set out for London. Exhausted, he seeks refuge in David Talbot's home, crawling into the library and collapsing onto a tiger skin. Before fainting, he catches the scent of mortal blood and senses David's familiar presence. Chapter 4. Lestat awakens in pain, his burned skin slowly regenerating. Despite his thirst, he remains motionless on the tiger skin, enduring the agony. David, ever attentive, has left him fresh clothes. When Lestat looks in the mirror, he notices an unexpected change. His skin has taken on an amber tone, similar to that of a tanned mortal. Fascinated, he feels he has achieved the impossible, a nearly perfect human disguise. David watches him, both distrustful and intrigued. Lestat, still thirsty, plans to hunt. Their conversation turns to death and immortality. Unlike Lestat, David does not fear dying. Confident in his faith, he shares theories about God and the devil, describing them as imperfect forces in constant evolution. Lestat listens with interest but remains convinced that death is the absolute end. With an ironic smile, he leaves to quench his thirst in the streets of London. Chapter 5. After satisfying his thirst, Lestat returns to David's home. Their conversation turns more personal as Talbot shares his past. He recounts his youth in Brazil, where he became involved in the world of candomblé. Haunted by spirits after falling in love with a young man named Carlos, he was forced to flee. However, his fascination led him to return and learn from a priestess. Lestat listens in silence, captivated. Then, David confesses a vision he once had in a Parisian cafe. He saw God and the devil conversing. According to him, the devil was tired of his work, but God insisted he continue. Lestat, intrigued, concludes that life is a game in which no one will ever know the answers. Before leaving, he asks David for his report on candomblé. In London, he settles into a hotel, but an envelope containing a strange story awaits him, making it clear that someone is following him. Chapter 6. Intrigued by the enigmatic mortal following him, Lestat travels to Paris. Although he has long avoided the city, he is once again captivated by its streets. He strolls along the Champs-Élysées, marveling at the modern architecture, but memories of the past haunt him. He settles at the Ritz under a false identity and spends his nights indulging in luxury. There, he reads David's manuscripts and uncovers his adventurous past, his fascination with candomblé, and his connection to the supernatural. That night, on a bridge near the Isle de la Cite, Lestat once again feels the disturbing sensation of being watched. Then, Raglan James appears, a man with awkward movements and an unsettling expression. He hands Lestat an envelope and utters cryptic words before fleeing. Puzzled, Lestat opens the envelope and finds a film about body swapping. The stranger's proposal finally makes sense. Chapter 7. Lestat returns to New Orleans, excited by the possibility of reclaiming his humanity. He wanders the streets, reveling in the nighttime atmosphere, recalling his life with Claudia and Louis. The past pursues him, and in his old home, he relives the shadows of his history. Seeking answers, he visits the secluded cabin where Louis hides among books and memories. He tells Louis everything about Raglan James and his offer. Horrified, Louis insists it is a trap and that Lestat must eliminate James before it is too late. But Lestat, stubborn as ever, clings to the hope of becoming human again. That night, while meditating by the river, he feels the weight of uncertainty. At dawn, inside St. Louis Cathedral, he lights a candle in search of clarity. But Louis finds him there and, with a somber warning, assures him that his fate is marked by danger. Chapter 8. Lestat walks through a windswept New Orleans until he reaches Jackson Square, where he meets Raglan James. The mysterious man, appearing young and elegant, seems nervous yet thrilled by the encounter. He insists on his proposal to exchange bodies with Lestat for a short period. In a nearby cafe, James details his ability to leave bodies and possess others, explaining the mechanics of the process. Lestat, fascinated by the idea of being human again, listens intently. James assures him the procedure is safe and proposes a financial arrangement as a guarantee. Intrigued and eager for the experience, Lestat agrees to a one-day exchange but refuses to commit beyond that. Before they part, he demands that James leave the city until the appointed day. As he wanders the night, Lestat is consumed by thoughts of what he is about to do. Chapter 9. Lestat meticulously arranges the transfer of funds to secure the deal with James. Meanwhile, he ignores David Talbot's repeated calls until he finally decides to answer. David reveals James' dark past, a con artist and criminal who was even expelled from the Talamasca. He confirms that James has indeed changed bodies, having stolen the physique of a young murderer. David warns Lestat about the dangers of trusting such a man, but Lestat remains resolute. Traveling to Georgetown, he inspects James' house and witnesses the stolen life of excess he now leads. In the backyard, Lestat encounters a large dog named Mojo, who immediately shows him affection. Returning to his refuge, Lestat grows increasingly convinced that he wants to experience human life, regardless of the risks. Chapter 10. Lestat and Raglan James meet in a house in Georgetown to carry out the long-awaited body swap. The dimly lit kitchen contrasts with the dark transaction about to unfold. James, exuding confidence, explains the process of leaving one's body and entering another. Lestat, anxious yet eager, follows his instructions. As he ascends, he experiences a weightless sensation before plunging into the new body. Instantly, he feels trapped by the heaviness of human flesh, his breathing unsteady, his heartbeat sluggish. As he struggles to adapt, his former body, now inhabited by James, shudders with terrifying euphoria before fleeing. Mojo, the dog, remains loyally by his side, but Lestat, overwhelmed by the vulnerability of his new existence, realizes the full extent of his decision. He is now completely human. Chapter 11. Lestat awakens in his new body, overwhelmed by the cold and the discomfort of mortality. He discovers the clumsiness of his new form, the pain of exposed skin in the snow, and the difficulty of seeing clearly. Hungry, he ventures into a restaurant where, for the first time in centuries, he tastes human food, only to find the experience disappointing and unpleasant. In an attempt to regain pleasure, he accepts the invitation of a young woman, but the encounter is awkward, rough, and devoid of the passion he once felt as a vampire. Humiliated and confused, he is disgusted by the fragility of the human body. With no money or resources, he calls his agent in Paris for help. Finally, he takes refuge in the house, confronting the helplessness of his new condition. However, at dawn, the sight of the sun and the blue sky gives him a fleeting sense of wonder, reminding him of the true miracle of being human. Chapter 12. Lestat wakes up with a worsening cold, but the sunlight intoxicates him with happiness. Accompanied by Mojo, he immerses himself in the daytime city, marveling at the energy of the people and the splendor of Washington's monuments. He watches mothers with their children, workers, and students feeling for the first time like one of them. However, his physical state rapidly deteriorates. He walks through Arlington and along the Potomac, enjoying the winter despite the pain. He buys clothes in Georgetown and, burning with fever, takes shelter in a luxurious hotel. There, he indulges in human pleasures. Food, sweets, and alcohol, but everything tastes bland. Despite his weakness, he writes frantically about his experience. Finally, exhausted, he falls into a deep sleep, eagerly awaiting James' arrival to reclaim his body. But when he wakes, the sun is shining. James has betrayed him. Chapter 13. Lestat realizes with horror that Raglan James has abandoned him in a sick and dying body. Desperate, he tries to seek help, but fever and weakness overwhelm him. In his delirium, he is trapped in memories of Claudia and his past as a vampire, reliving his guilt and fear. Eventually, he is found and taken to a hospital, where a nun named Gretchen tends to him with kindness. Lestat confesses his story to her, and though she does not fully believe him, she decides to take him out of the hospital and care for him at her home. As she helps him walk, Lestat clings to his lost humanity, grappling with the fragility of his new condition. Afraid of what lies ahead, he accepts Gretchen's help, knowing that his only hope is to find a way to reclaim his body and take revenge on James. Chapter 14. Still feverish and weak, Lestat travels with Gretchen in a car toward an isolated cabin. The movement makes him dizzy, and the presence of Mojo comforts him. Upon arrival, he insists on bathing despite Gretchen's protests, confronting the image of his new body in the mirror, feeling like a monster. Through their conversations, Lestat tries to explain his story, his desire to regain his body, and his views on good and evil. Gretchen tends to him with devotion, shaves his face, and offers him comfort, though her faith clashes with Lestat's perspective on the world. During the night, his fever plunges him into disturbing dreams where Claudia confronts him about his past actions. His fear of death intensifies, but Gretchen, with a tenderness that unsettles him, promises she will not let him die. Chapter 15. As his health improves, Lestat gives in to the passion and closeness he shares with Gretchen. Seeing her vulnerability, he feels both the urge to possess and protect her. Gretchen, battling her own inner conflict, surrenders to him with a mix of desire and fear. The experience is intense but fleeting, leaving Lestat with a sense of emptiness and separation. During the early hours of the morning, he reflects on the duality of his existence and his longing to reclaim his true body. Gretchen, on the other hand, seems at peace with her decision to be with him, but remains firm in her commitment to return to her mission. As he watches her, Lestat wonders if he could give her the dark gift, but he realizes she would never accept it. As dawn approaches, he feels a deeper connection to her, yet he knows his destiny is calling him back to the battle against the body thief. Chapter 16. Recovered, Lestat shares breakfast with Gretchen, enjoying her company but fully aware of his imminent departure. Gretchen opens up about her past, her calling, and the sacrifice of her musical talent for her faith. Lestat listens, both fascinated and disturbed, as their views on life are diametrically opposed. While she finds purpose in serving others, he craves greatness and individual transcendence. Their conversation makes it clear he cannot deny his true nature. Later, he makes calls to track down the body thief and discovers that James attempted to steal his fortune and murdered his agent. Furious, Lestat knows he must act quickly. Aware that his time with Gretchen has come to an end, he confesses his desire to see her again if he manages to reclaim his body. She agrees, but her path will lead her back to her mission. Lestat prepares for the next battle. Chapter 17. Lestat bids farewell to Gretchen at the airport, promising to find her again at the mission. During his flight to New Orleans, he experiences mortal anxiety, fearing the plane might explode. His mind is consumed with worries about Louis and the safety of his apartment. Arriving under a violent storm, he heads to Louis's home, a bleak and neglected refuge. He bangs on the door, calling out desperately, until exhaustion forces him to light a candle and collapse into his old armchair. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the darkness and violently attacks him. Louis pins him down, unable to recognize him in his new body. Mojo, Lestat's loyal dog, attempts to defend him but is knocked aside. With his last ounce of strength, Lestat manages to gesture toward himself and whisper his name. Doubt flashes across Louis's face as he finally recognizes him. Chapter 18. Lestat tells Louis everything. His deal with Raglan James, his time with Gretchen, and his desperate situation. As his fear grows, he realizes Louis has no intention of helping him. Lestat begs him to turn him back into a vampire, explaining how unbearable human fragility is. But Louis, sorrowful, refuses. To him, this is the redemption Lestat has always sought, a second chance at a mortal life. Furious, Lestat feels betrayed, insisting that he was never meant to be human. Louis remains resolute and, in one final act of compassion, advises Lestat to return to Gretchen. Then, without another word, he vanishes into the darkness. Abandoned, Lestat succumbs to despair. In a fit of rage, he sets Louis's cabin on fire. As he watches the flames consume it, a figure appears in the rain, Marius. Without saying a word, Marius looks at him with disdain and walks away, leaving Lestat in the depths of his misery. Chapter 19. Lestat spends the night in a cafe, strategizing how to enter his apartment. When he arrives, he finds the door forced open, but his fortune remains untouched. Just then, David Talbot appears, immediately recognizing him after a brief hesitation. They embrace, and Lestat recounts everything that has happened. David reveals that Raglan James has left a trail of crime, wreaking havoc in New York, Florida, and Santo Domingo. Based on the pattern of his movements, they deduce that James is traveling aboard the luxurious Queen Elizabeth II cruise ship. They plan to board at its next stop, in the island of Grenada, and set a trap for him. David secures false passports and a hidden cabin for Lestat. As they finalize the details, Lestat begins to feel a growing attraction to David, but David keeps him focused on their mission. Together, they set off to hunt the body thief. Chapter 20. Lestat and David arrive in Granada, where the warmth of the Caribbean contrasts with the cold determination in their minds. As they settle into a modest beachfront hotel, Lestat feels a deep longing for his vampire senses and the frustration of his mortal limitations. That night, he walks along the shore, reflecting on his failure as a human. David interrupts him with news. Their contact, Jake, has arrived. In their room, Jake provides them with weapons and tickets to board the Queen Elizabeth II, where they believe Raglan James is hiding. The description of the imposter confirms that he is reveling in luxury and preying on wealthy older women. Before the night ends, David trains Lestat in mind control and astral projection, teaching him how to leave his body and strike at James when the time comes. Exhausted, they both prepare for the ultimate mission. Chapter 21. Lestat and David arrive at the port and board the Queen Elizabeth II. The massive ocean liner, luxurious and filled with elderly passengers, leaves them impressed. Jake has already smuggled weapons into their cabin and provides key information. James has been gambling in the casino, sending mysterious packages, and sleeping during the day. Additionally, there have been reports of suspicious deaths on board. As they explore the ship, Lestat senses the presence of his own body inside the Queen Victoria suite. Pretending to be a concerned doctor, David bribes the staff and obtains a key to the suite. When they enter, they find James sleeping inside a large trunk. The sight of his preternatural body shocks Lestat, who quickly closes the trunk before James can awaken. With their strategy set, they prepare for the final confrontation as the ship departs for Barbados. Chapter 22. Lestat and David search for a hiding place until dawn. During the night, Lestat comes face to face with his former body, now inhabited by James. Watching from the shadows, he is struck by James' clumsiness and arrogance. He knows his chance will come soon. As dawn approaches, they make their way to the Queen Victoria suite. James rushes back, only to find David waiting for him, gun in hand. Lestat attacks with all his willpower, but James resists. David urges him to surrender, but the imposter refuses. In a final attempt, Lestat lunges again and successfully forces James out of his body. Reclaiming his vampire form, Lestat flees before the rising sun can destroy him. As he runs to his hiding place, he hears gunshots coming from the suite. Exhausted and weak, he locks himself inside his cabin. His last thought before falling unconscious is of David. Chapter 23. Lestat awakens with the certainty that both James and David are no longer on the ship. As he recovers from his return to his vampire body, he delights in his reflection and regained agility, but his concern for David pushes him to investigate. In the Queen Victoria suite, he discovers that all traces of the confrontation have been erased and that the ship has already departed from Barbados. Using his persuasive abilities, he interrogates a crew member and learns that David was arrested for shooting a young assailant and was later escorted onto a plane bound for Miami. James, however, has vanished. Before leaving, Lestat steals new clothes and money from the passport of Jason Hamilton, the identity James had been using. Finally, he rises above the ship, gazing at the sea, reaffirming his determination to find the body thief and put an end to his game. Chapter 24. Lestat travels to the South American jungle, where he finds Gretchen's mission. Fascinated by the raw beauty of the landscape, he steps into the hospital where she works. Observing the sick children, he feels a strange sense of familiarity with his past. When he finally sees Gretchen, she reacts in horror upon recognizing his true nature. Her faith compels her to reject him, raising a crucifix and pleading for him to leave. Devastated, Lestat leaves behind a large sum of money for the mission and flees. Later, he finds her in the chapel, caught in a state of mystical ecstasy, with blood flowing from her palms in what appears to be a stigmata miracle. As the crowd venerates her, Lestat steps away, feeling the weight of rejection and realizing that his hope of bringing her into his world has completely failed. Chapter 25. Shaken by his encounter with Gretchen, Lestat ventures deeper into the jungle, seeking solace in solitude. He comes across an abandoned temple, overgrown with vegetation, and decides to take shelter there before dawn. As he gazes at the jungle with unexpected melancholy, he realizes that, despite everything, he does not feel miserable. Memories of Claudia and the ghosts of his past return, but without the anguish they once carried. Resting on the damp ground, he feels the presence of small creatures around him. Before falling asleep, he whispers a final farewell to his loved ones, accepting that, despite his intense emotions, he remains the same Lestat as always. His determination to confront James and reunite with David remains unshaken. Chapter 26. Lestat arrives in Miami and meets David at a restaurant. Though exhausted, David seems deeply concerned about him. Lestat confesses his encounter with Gretchen and his disappointment, seeking comfort in his friend. In the middle of their conversation, David shocks Lestat by asking to be turned into a vampire. Stunned, Lestat takes him to his hotel room. However, as he finally bites him, he experiences a horrifying revelation. The man in his arms is not David, but Raglan James in his friend's body. Enraged, Lestat hurls him against the wall, gravely injuring him. Horrified by what he has done, he calls for emergency services and flees the hotel. As he tries to process the tragedy, he sees David, now in a young, healthy body, calm and fully in control. Confused, Lestat follows him into a taxi, unable to comprehend what has just happened. Chapter 27. Still dazed by the events, Lestat follows David to a suite in a Miami hotel. He watches in fascination as his old friend now inhabits a strong, youthful body. David, with his usual composure, confirms that he understands what has happened and has accepted his new existence. However, Lestat insists that James is still trapped in his former, dying body at the hospital. David expresses doubt about his fate but ultimately decides not to attempt reclaiming his old self. Instead, he shares his experience of awakening in Barbados, discovering the vigor and energy of his new being. He recounts his escape from the ship and his adaptation to his new life, vividly describing the beauty of the island and his newfound appreciation for existence. As Lestat listens, he begins to realize that his friend has changed forever. Chapter 28. Lestat and David arrive at the hospital where David's original body, now inhabited by James, has been admitted. Lestat enters alone and returns with grim news. The old man has died. David remains unmoved, accepting the loss of his former body with serene resignation. Lestat, however, feels as if he has lost his friend forever. Together, they observe the lifeless corpse, and David, showing no emotion, confirms that he senses neither James nor his former self in the room. After leaving the hospital, David reflects on his future and his new identity. Lestat offers to help him recover his wealth, but he realizes that David has been reborn with a new perspective. Finally, Lestat bids him farewell, knowing that the bond they once shared has irrevocably changed. Alone in the Miami night, he succumbs to his thirst for blood, realizing that he has lost not only David but also the city itself. Chapter 29. Lestat returns to New Orleans after a trip through the Florida Keys, hoping to reclaim his life. He reunites with Mojo, his dog, feeling a deep relief when the animal still recognizes him. Deciding to leave him in the care of his tenant, he visits him when he pleases. He then returns to his former home on Royal Street, a decaying mansion where he once lived with Louis and Claudia. He hires a young restorer to restore the house to its former French grandeur, selecting every detail meticulously. Exploring the attic where Claudia once tried to kill him, he envisions his new dwelling. Despite his melancholy, he feels renewed. He remembers his old companions and suffers from Louis's betrayal. That night, sadness consumes him until he breaks into tears. Mojo licks his face, but Lestat, horrified, pushes him away. Finally, in a fit of fury and nostalgia, he storms off to his crypt, feeling lonelier than ever. Chapter 30. Lestat surrenders to a frenzy of travel and hunting. He visits Georgetown, where he finds Gretchen but leaves her behind after confirming she did not bear his child. He then wanders through Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, absorbing the beauty of the world while feeding on both criminals and innocents. In every city, he leaves his mark, making his presence known to other vampires without truly seeking them out. He revels in his power like never before, delighting in his speed and strength. Yet deep inside he suffers. He cannot stop thinking about Lewis, his only true connection. He wonders if he will ever be able to face him without anger or pain. Finally, exhausted and with his clothes in tatters, he feels the call of home and returns to New Orleans. Chapter 31. Lestat prepares for his meeting with Lewis, leaving clues of his return. One night, he sees Lewis watching the restoration of his old home and leads him to an empty cathedral. There, he waits, trembling, trying to control his anger. Lewis arrives, sits beside him, and breaks the silence by accusing him of setting his house on fire. Lestat responds with irony and challenges him to live with him. During their conversation, he admits that Lewis was right. He never truly wanted to be human. Lewis listens intently, recognizing that he never doubted his own victory. Lestat then confronts him with a key question. If he had been trapped in a mortal body forever, would Lewis have continued refusing to turn him? Lewis hesitates, unable to answer. Enraged, Lestat threatens to destroy him, but deep down he knows he never could. Before leaving, he lights a candle in the church, not for anyone else but for himself, accepting his nature and his solitude. Chapter 32. Lestat reflects on his tale, wondering if he should end it here, with the image of the candle burning. But deep inside, he knows the story is not yet over. He hints at something more, an unexpected revelation that will change the course of his destiny. He invites the reader to continue if they wish to know what truly happened next, warning that they may regret not stopping here. Chapter 33. Lestat travels to Barbados in search of David, who is staying at a seaside hotel. After weeks of waiting, he finally decides to confront him. He finds David, tanned and relaxed, typing on his computer. Lestat is surprised by his physical transformation and newfound confidence. David greets him warmly, but Lestat hides his true intentions. He watches him with a mix of admiration and desire until he finally decides to turn him into a vampire. David resists furiously, but Lestat overpowers him, drinking his blood in a cruel yet ecstatic pleasure. Despite the struggle, David succumbs and is reborn as an immortal. Upon his first awakening, overwhelmed by his newfound perceptions, David flees into the sea. Lestat guides him, teaching him the first steps of his new existence. Back in New Orleans, David awaits him, proposing that they travel together to Rio. Lestat, surprised, realizes that his story is far from over. Thanks for joining us for this summary of the tale of the body thief. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share it with your friends. Now tell me in the comments, what do you think about Lestat's decision to switch bodies? And which book in the Vampire Chronicles is your personal favorite?